And we're on a roll. We're here at Christmas headquarters. We've got Christmas bears. We've got Christmas mice. We've got Christmas snowmen. We've got festive apple tea. We've got it all. We had Christmas music, but no one wanted to get up and turn the record over, so we'll have to do more of that later. So what we have now is a story, A Christmas Miracle it's called, and it was written by Kathleen Ruckman. We might as well just jump into it. We've had enough fanfare. It was December 23, 1908, and a plague of diphtheria swept through eastern Czechoslovakia that Christmas season. In the tiny village of, I can't pronounce that, Veliki Slavkov, lying in the shadow of the high Tatra mountains, a solitary man walked a deserted street, pulling his hat low on his head against the bitter wind. The man pressed ahead, passing homes with drawn shades and tightly shuttered windows. For weeks, diphtheria, an acute infectious disease that strikes the upper respiratory system, had ravaged the small towns along the foothills of the Tatra region. Nearly half the townspeople, if I can't pronounce that place, had fallen in the plague. 50%. Boy, that's not nearly as scary as the plague today. This was 50% of the people were dead in town. Wow. Not as much as we're dealing with, though. Sorry. Anyway. Nearly half of the townspeople had fallen to the plague, and many of the victims young children less than 10 years of age. Carrying a pail of black paint, the man climbed a flight of outdoor stairs and swabbed an X on the wooden doorpost of the Boratko household. Another home was quarantined. After the man left, Susanna Boratko knelt at her doorpost, weeping and praying in Slovak. In less than a week, she and her husband, Jano, were suddenly childless. Their oldest child, 5-year-old Mariana, had succumbed to the disease a few days earlier. In the backyard, Jano labored in the woodshed, pounding the last nail into the coffins he was building for his 2 sons, who had died earlier that day from diphtheria. Between sobs, Jano coughed and wheezed, because he too had contracted the deadly plague. Susanna returned to the house. Crying in agony, she cleaned and wrapped her sons for a final time, carefully laying them into the handmade pine caskets. She and Jano lifted them onto the wagon, and with a quick slap of the reins started the slow journey to the town cemetery. Driving the horses through the foot-high snow, Jano and Susanna braced themselves against a chilling wind that stung both body and soul. Another trip to the graveyard is more than I can bear, Susanna cried out as they passed house after house, marred with the black death mark. The couple empathized with those families, but they didn't have the strength to offer sympathy or encouragement. They were too wrapped up in their own grief, much like the cotton muslins tightly swathed around their sons. 2 more grave sites had been dug into the frozen earth. Now all 3 children were together for eternity. Susanna, struggling through the Lord's Prayer, hugged the cold ground and wouldn't let go. Jano finally pulled her away, with what little strength he had, to led her back to the wagon. She clutched her empty arms and crossed them over her broken heart. She reminded herself that she would never hold her babies again. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. As Jano and Susanna entered their barren and branded house, they needed comfort. They needed solace from their village friends, but no one dared come near. There were no Christmas greetings. No sympathies were extended. The black X spelled death and do not enter. Their dark house was a frightful, forbidden tomb. Little high-laced brown leather shoes were still lined up against the wood stove, as they usually were when the children were tenderly tucked into the same bed. But now the large feather bed was empty, and the old stucco house had never felt so cold. I won't see another Christmas, Jano whispered weakly to his wife. I don't think I'll see the New Year in either. He pushed away the soup and bread that he could not swallow. It was as though the Diphtheria had tied a noose tightly round his throat, allowing neither food nor sufficient air to sustain him. The village doctor had shrugged his shoulders when he visited Jano a few days before. He had no cure. Susanna gathered some kindling wood and lit a fire for the night, sure that her husband was about to die. Morning arrived. Jano was still alive. Snowflakes fell from a gray sky, and the wind blew a white mist over the frosted windows. Susanna, exhausted from a restless night with little sleep, dipped her cloth again in cold water to cool Jano's burning fever. Then, rubbing the icy glaze off her lattice window, she fixed her eyes on the Tatra Mountains. Her mind contemplated Psalm 121, 1 to 2. I will look to the hills from whence cometh my help. Suddenly, her gaze was interrupted as she saw a peasant woman trudging through the snow. The old woman's red and purple plaid shawl, draped over her hunched shoulders, hardly seemed warm enough against the morning chill. She wore a babushka wrapped around her head. Her long peasant skirt was a bright display of cotton and linen patchwork. The woolen leggings and high-buttoned boots allowed her to successfully tread the snow-filled street. In one of her uncovered hands she carried a jar of clear liquid. Susanna stood half stunned and watched the old woman as she shuffled up the forbidden walkway. She heard the knocker strike twice. She cautiously opened the door and looked into an unusual face, one wrinkled from years of farm work and severe winters, but her eyes expressed a warmth that filled Susanna's heart. We have the plague in our home, and my husband is in a fever right now, Susanna warned her. The old woman nodded and asked if she could step inside. She held out her little jar to Susanna. Take a clean white linen and wrap it around your finger, she instructed. Dip your finger into this pure kerosene oil and swab out your husband's throat, and then have him swallow a tablespoon of the oil. This should cause him to vomit the deadly mucus. Otherwise, he will surely suffocate. I will pray for you and your family. The old woman squeezed Susanna's hand and quickly stepped out into the frigid outdoors. Never before had Susanna's heart been touched in that way. Here was a poor woman appearing in love on her doorstep in the midst of a plague. Her unexpected gift was a folk remedy against diphtheria. I'll try it, she called out to the old woman with tears in her eyes. God bless you. Early Christmas morning, Jano wrenched up the deadly phlegm. His fever was broken. Susanna wept and praised God. A flicker of hope lightened her heart for a moment. Surely God would someday bless her and Jano with more children. There were no presents under the trimmed and tinseled tree that Christmas morning, but the jar of oil glimmered on the window sill as a gift of life for generations to come. And then that's the end, but there's an epilogue. In the days following the miraculous healing of Jano, Susanna shared the folk remedy with her neighbors. In the 1920s, Jano immigrated to America to find work. Susanna joined him later with their 8 children. Their ship reached Ellis Island on Washington's birthday, February 22, 1926, and the family settled near the steel mills of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The family eventually consisted of a set of triplets, 2 sets of twins, and 2 single births. 2 of the triplet boys were named John and Paul after the 2 sons who died from diphtheria. The other triplet was named Samuel, the father of this author.